And welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. The jury has just taken a lunch break during this riveting testimony. This was Jane Doe, who survived repeated rapes and kidnapping at the mercy of Sean Grates, the defendant, she says. Is there any doubt whatsoever as to her credibility after you've sat here, Aaron Keller, and listened to all of the details? I mean, it's excruciatingly
disturbing, yeah,
it's
painful.
Disturbing, it is. It's upsetting. I mean, I know some people here got emotional, myself included.
Look, I'm not there to look at her demeanor, and of course the nonverbal communication is it carries more weight than verbal communication, but I don't think she's making this up. I mean, there are too many details attached to it.
Right, and of course the 911 call, which we'll hear in a minute. But then what's the point of the cross-examination? Can it be effective in any way, shape, or form when you have somebody as sympathetic as this?
Listen to what they're asking. They're asking about this guy's religious proclivity. They're asking about this guy's good deeds with her, basically. Oh, he took you here and he was completely normal. He took you there and he was completely normal. And he talked about the Bible with you. He never did any drugs in front of you. They're asking these questions to try to normalize the guy. And again, I think that
why? So where are they going to go with that?
We're looking at the sentencing. I'm waiting for the argument to shape up at sentencing that there's something wired wrong with this guy's brain, and that these earlier episodes are proof that he was trying to fight against the bad wiring in his brain to be a normal guy, and then the bad wiring took over and he committed the crimes.
That he snapped, though, this was not an instantaneous thing. If you listen to her testimony, it went on and on and on, and he even left for a couple of hours, came back. Does that undermine this whole theory that, oh, all of a sudden he had some sort of a brain disturbance that drove him to do this in the moment?
Well, I think that the argument might be that he had one that he was trying to fight against, that he knew something was wrong with him, but that he didn't, for instance, seek the proper help. And we've seen arguments like that before in other cases. My guess is that that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to build a record here that not all was bad about this guy, and that there was sort of a Jekyll and Hyde situation going on here, and there's possible proof of redeemability. I think that's what they're trying to get at. Is the jury going to buy it? Usually juries don't, so you never know, but usually they don't.
Pretty amazing, though, that she escaped after all of this, considering that 2 other women did not, and their bodies were found in his closet and basement, rotting. Why do you think this guy would hold on to those bodies? Obviously a sick individual.
I have no idea.
But she actually testified that he was neat, that he was normally a neat person, and then all of a sudden he has closets with decomposing bodies and maggots inside of them.
I cannot peer into this guy's soul and try to make sense of him, nor do I think I want to. I mean, the facts are just the facts, if we're to believe this testimony and the corroboration from all the police officers who showed up on the scene.
Absolutely.
It is what it is.
And, of course, the crime scene photos. She did escape. Let's listen to the 911 call of what she said when she managed to reach a phone.
911, what is the address to your emergency?
4th Street, Laundromat.
What's the problem?
I've been abducted.
Who abducted you?
Sean Grates.
Where's she at now?
Asleep.
Where's she sleeping at?
In the bedroom. Please hurry.
Does he have a weapon?
He's got a taser.
Are you tied up now?
Yeah, but I kind of freed myself. Are they on the way?
Yeah, we have officers we're sending.
Please send enough.
Hey, if you're worried, you don't have to talk. You can just set the phone down, okay? I just need to hear if the officer's find you or not.
Oh, shit, I woke him up.
I just set the phone down. Okay, can you get to the door where you can see out? Huh? Can you get out of the house?
Locked.
It's locked. Are you at the door?
Yeah, I am.
She's at the door.
Come on out. Hurry up. Get out here. Where is he?
Bedroom sleeping.
still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay, they have her.
You're not unarmed.
Unarmed?
Yeah.
Right. Right now. Do it.
Just listening to that again, Aaron, my heart is racing because it sounds like a movie, and the cops got there really fast.
Look, they must have been very close by. But look at the efficiency of the dispatch here. Within seconds of a call being placed, you have one dispatcher relaying information to another, okay? And
While
you also,
asking her questions.
While asking questions. I mean, they're moving along lickety-split here. That's efficient dispatching. This is a dispatcher who believed what was happening, or at a minimum wanted answers to see what was up. And look at the confusion over the address and how they found that. My presumption is they probably had a GPS plot off the phone, because she said the nearest point that she knew she was near, which is
a laundromat.
Laundromat
Right.
on 4th Street. Well, clearly she wasn't in the laundromat. She was in one of the houses nearby. She probably didn't know the exact address of the house where she had been abducted and taken. So she gives a nearby address. She, tries to wave them down. They see her. They're looking around. I mean, this just shows how instantaneous this happened. But listen to the tone in her voice. He's trying to
she's terrified.
To hush her voice to make sure that they get to her.
And then when she says he's sleeping and, oh my gosh, he just woke up, like terror went through my body, because you can feel the anxiety in her voice. There are moments to save her life, because really it only takes seconds to kill somebody, and that's what he could have done had he seen that she called for help. And then he could have made his escape.
Yes.
But luckily everything turned out well for her.
Yeah, I mean, it's disturbing to listen to. And look, she's on the stand now, and a lot of people are saying on Twitter, hey, look, what's the deal? She's recounting this. It's horrific. One person said, did she have a tone of forgiveness in her voice? And one has to wonder, how does somebody who's been victimized in such a way try to deal with it? Everybody deals with it a different way. It's possible that, in order to not harbor resentment for the rest of her life, that she had to go through some process to say, I don't know what, this guy's a bad guy, this guy's evil, but I can't hate the world forever because of it, because then I'll just wind up carrying that hatred with me. Maybe some people are reading that into her voice, but it doesn't change the facts of what she's saying on that witness stand.
Yeah, and I don't know if I read any forgiveness into her voice, but certainly I feel like she's still traumatized by the event, which is understandable. I mean, I think this will probably live with her forever, even if she goes through therapy.
Of course it will.
Because it was just so traumatic in every single aspect. I mean, we talked about it before, from the grooming and the building of trust to all of a sudden he snaps. And we have a clip, actually, of her testifying as to the moment that things changed with Sean Grates. So listen.
So when he started pulling the Bible from my hands, I just looked up, like, curious, like, what are you doing? And that's when he said, that's when he says, you're not going anywhere. We started fighting.
In what way?
I tried to push him away and get up, and I was just doing everything, trying to kick, punch, but everything I did, he just did it so much harder.
Did he hit you?
Yes.
With what?
His fists.
Where did he hit you?
My head, my face.
One time? More than one time?
Several times, as long as I kept fighting.
And did you continue to fight?
Until he started choking me.
How was he choking?
With both hands around my neck.
Was he facing you?
Uh-huh.
And what did you do?
I stopped.
Why?
Because I knew I couldn't get out of it.
Did he say anything to you while this was happening?
Nope.
Did he let go of your neck?
I think when I stopped struggling and fighting, he asked me if I had enough. And I think I just remained motionless, and so he released his hands.
And then what happened?
He started pulling off my clothes.
Did you continue to resist at that point?
No,
Why not?
because he already showed me that he was a lot stronger.
Were you in fear for your life?
I don't know.
Were you injured at that point?
Yeah.
Did you lose consciousness or anything?
No, but I was bleeding.
From where?
My head somewhere.
Did he take all your clothes off?
Yeah, he started pulling them off, and I started hearing the fabric tear, and I wanted clothes to get back into, so I took them off.
Yeah. Did you want to take your clothes off?
No, but I had no option.
Was that due to the force that he had used on you?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened to your clothes?
I set him aside. I don't know.
Then what happened?
I can't really recall. I don't know. I mean,
At some point on the night of the 11th, were you sexually assaulted?
several times.
How were you assaulted?
In every way imaginable.
With what?
How do you mean?
Did you use fingers?
No.
His penis?
Yeah.
Where did he put his penis?
I don't know.
How often did this occur?
I don't know.
More than once?
Yeah.
More than 5 times?
I don't know.
Was this a substantial change in Sean from what you had seen before?
Yeah.
Had you had any indication prior to September 11th at his house if he had any capability of harming you?
No. No, he always came off as a nice guy.
Have you ever made sexual advances towards you?
No, not atypical from the way a guy, first tries to make advances.
Okay, but nothing overt or rude?
No.
At some point, were you tied up?
Yeah.
How many times were you tied up?
At least 3.
Where were you tied?
You would.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network, and we are breaking out of that very riveting and difficult to listen to testimony from Jane Doe, a woman who survived a suspected serial killer after he kidnapped her and raped her multiple times. But we have some news for you. Bill Cosby has been found guilty on 3 counts of assault. Aaron Keller, do you want to break this down for us?
Okay,
the jury
look,
just delivered the verdict.
This just come down seconds ago. Here's what we've got. We had 3 counts of aggravated assault against Bill Cosby, 80 years old. Ultimately, more than 60 women accused him, but the trial was limited to just a limited number of accusations.
It was just one woman, Andrea Constand, that he was accused of drugging and molesting back in 2004, and I believe that was because the statute of limitations prevented prosecutors from bringing charges in other states, even though, as you said, the charges spanned different states and even countries.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so a possibility of a 10-year sentence here on each count. The jurors, 7 men, 5 women. They deliberated about 14 hours on this. This is a big surprise. Now, what's interesting here is, remember, Bill Cosby's legal team took a much more aggressive approach in this trial than in the previous trial.
And there is his accuser, Andrea Constant, who was the operations manager of the Temple University basketball team, and that's how Bill Cosby formed a relationship with her, because he was a famous alum. They got to talking, they struck up a conversation. He became a mentor until he invited her back to his home in and around 2004, and she says that's when he offered her 3 pills that he said would relax her. She took them, and that's when she said she wasn't able to fight him off when he sexually assaulted her.
And you've got evidence issues as to whether or not somebody can clearly remember something that happened when they were drugged. But look, it looks bad. If you give somebody pills and then they can't remember things. I mean, the jurors ultimately here in this trial looked at that and said, this smells like no good.
And of course, we saw that complication too, where he had settled with her outside of court and she had received over $3 million. But later on, in an interesting twist, even though he had been promised that if he testified in a civil deposition, it would never be disclosed, prosecutors rolled back that promise, said that it was an invalid promise that was made at the time, and they used that testimony from his civil deposition in this trial where he admitted to giving women Quaaludes in the past when he wanted to sleep with them. How incriminating is that? And I mean, how much did that factor in? We heard it in the first trial, and it didn't lead to a guilty conviction. Why do you think it may have impacted the decision here?
You know, look, I mean, we had more people testify in this case, so that likely influenced it because they were able to bring it in, I'm assuming, and again, this was closed to cameras, so we couldn't cover the proceedings wall to wall like we do in many of the other cases here, Law and Crime. But look, you had more testimony, probably getting in under the evidence rule that says you can get it in if it shows evidence of a routine or pattern. So prosecutors didn't want to make the mistake of jurors thinking this was some little isolated incident. They want to say, okay, this is the only one we can bring to you, but there is evidence of a routine or pattern here. This fits the pattern, therefore you can convict. That's probably what they did also.
But on that point, Aaron, before you go to your next one, do you think there was a problem when in the first trial that testimony of all these women did not come in the second trial? You see 5 women testifying, and that's bolstering this woman's claims, in addition to the past drug admissions that he had in the deposition.
Do I see it was, what was the question?
That it's a problem that the other women can bolster this accuser's allegations in this trial.
Well, look, I mean, if it's allowed under the rules of evidence, then presumably it's just. It does sort of raise issues as to whether he's guilty of this specific instance with this specific woman. But look, this is the way many rules of evidence work. They can bring in these like occurrences if, and I'd have to pull out my evidence book to get into the specific language of it, but oftentimes they can get into these like occurrences to indicate that there was a pattern here and that the conduct in this specific case against this specific victim fits the pattern. We've seen
right,
it in
but
a couple
in the first trial, one of his accusers testified. Now you have 5 accusers testifying. Is there an argument that Cosby could make, like, listen, it wasn't allowed in the first trial, now you have it in the second trial and you have a guilty verdict. I'm going to appeal on that basis.
He could, certainly. Okay, and then we get into the nitty-gritty of how those rules of evidence operate and whether or not we're talking about character or whether or not we're talking about conduct. And oftentimes they're a little bit different in other states, so we'd have to drill into the weeds on this to try to get to the bottom of it.
But do you think that was the difference? Because that seems to be the major difference here. You've got 5 people testifying, telling their stories, versus 1 additional person.
Yes, exactly. I mean, prosecutors didn't want to leave anything open to interpretation on the first, in this case, because they presented a more limited case on the first case. This time around, they threw more evidence into the mix. They probably didn't do it on the first case because they may have been afraid that it could make an appeals issue. So look, if there had been a guilty verdict on the first case, then they wouldn't have to worry about this potential appeal issue of lumping more victims in as evidence as happened here. So, but the first case didn't result in a guilty verdict, so they got another bite at the apple. They threw more evidence in. Another thing happened that was interesting in this case, though. It was made pretty clear that Cosby's defense team would be more harsh, would be more probing, would come across more abrasively, be more aggressive. I wonder if that backfired. When you're trying to be aggressive towards someone who claims they have been victimized, that can backfire. That's the other thing here. Maybe that aggressive legal tactic just didn't work here. Maybe jurors saw it as desperation. Maybe they didn't like it. Maybe. We don't know for sure, but that could have been another deciding factor.
But of course, content-wise, he raised the same defense, saying that the sex was consensual and these women were just after fame and money. And, in fact, Andrea Constand, I believe it was part of the factual assertion in this case, that she was there that night to talk with him about alternative career options. That was a motivating factor for a lot of these women going into a situation with him that ended up turning horribly wrong.
Well, look, I mean, if people are making inroads with Bill Cosby, they were making inroads with him, I don't think to defraud him of anything or to use him. They probably looked up to the guy and wanted advice from him. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, just about everybody in a professional situation mentors somebody else at some point in their life. Here, though, as you said, it did go horribly wrong. So to try to characterize that as somehow nefarious, I would have to have a lot more detail to be able to determine that it's per se nefarious rather than just someone trying to better themselves. There's nothing wrong with trying to better yourself or look at new opportunities.
Of course, and it doesn't invite you being raped, obviously, but this was part of his defense, that, listen, they were after fame, they were after money in the beginning, after with these allegations, and then the second part, that there was consent from them. And this jury, while it was deliberating, because it deliberated more than 14 hours, they did ask for the legal definition of consent, but the judge said under Pennsylvania law he couldn't define it. Is that fair?
That doesn't seem fair at first blush, because usually that's something that is defined. That bothered me, of course. Juries have to make decisions based on the law that is on the books. I think juries need to be given clear instructions to take back into the jury room. In some states, look, when I served on a civil jury in New York years and years ago, long before I even went to law school, I was right out of undergrad. I was in my early 20s, okay? I think I was 23. One of the areas where we stuck was in having to go back into the room and try to unravel what the judge told us about the law. We're like, wait a minute, how did he define that? So we had to go out and get another read back. And we see in some states, they aren't allowed to have copies of the law back there. No, they should. They should have clear instructions back there so they can go through it bit by bit and say, this is what we find, this is what we don't find. So
especially when it comes to consent, because that's what the case turns upon, right? When you're talking about rape. consent.
Yeah, they told them to rely on their memory of it. That's
right.
I mean, law is written. It's not a secret. It's written down for a reason. We don't just make laws up. They are passed through a process. Juries need to have access to them. They need to have copious access to the laws on the book that they are asked to interpret.
Yeah, so again, Bill Cosby found guilty on all counts, 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault. Define that for us. What's your understanding of what that means? And as you said, each count carries up to 10 years in prison, so he faces up to 30 years in prison. He's 80 years old, we should note. Yeah,
different states define assault a little bit differently. It's been a while since I've looked at Pennsylvania's, but look, it's some kind of an unprivileged touching. In other words, he had contact with someone without permission or some legal privilege. You know, it's, for instance, what do we mean by legally privileged? Going up to someone in a professional situation and reaching out to shake hands with them. Well, that's something that the law allows, okay, just as a base matter of law, okay. You can't sue somebody for assault if they try to shake your hand. Yeah. That would just get tossed out of court and say, well, in society that's civil, people shake hands with one another. But here there was an unprivileged, unwanted, non-permission sort of contact
of
or
a sexual nature.
Contact. Yes.
So
exactly.
Is this a death sentence, Aaron? Because we just said he's 80 years old. He faces up to 30 years in prison. Will he even live to see an appeal play out here?
Well, I mean, depends on how fast the appeal plays out. And different states have different rules as to how fast you have to kick into an appeal. But look, I mean, 10-year, are they going to serve these things concurrently or back to back? We don't know. I'd have to look into that. Different states are different on that, too. But, I mean, look, if he serves his time out and he gets the maximum sentence on at least one of the counts, and what's he looking at getting out when he's 90? Even if he serves them all together.
Right.
So, you know, and look, different states do that different ways, too. They do parole. They do behavior. They do time served. They have all different ways of ferreting out what sounds like a big sentence that could be chipped down in half or even less, depending on how the judge plays this out. Could it, in theory, be a quote-unquote death sentence? Well, I mean, people always say that. You know, I guess that it takes the facts literally, that if you're 80, you don't know how much longer you're going to live. But it's not a death sentence. It is a sentence that is, in the mind of the legislature, proportionate to the crime that has been charged where a guilty verdict has been delivered. That's ultimately what it is.
Right, but it could turn into a death sentence for Bill Cosby solely because of his age. I mean, being imprisoned at 80 and facing 30 years.
Yeah, but it's not really a death sentence. I mean, a death sentence is a sentence that is a specific punishment for a specific type of crime. I get what you're saying.
I mean, he's not being put to death. Yes, of
Yeah.
course. All right, so let's call it a life sentence. Sounds like a life sentence at 80 years old, unless he has really good genes and he's going to live past 110, right? If he gets the maximum, we don't know. We're going to wait for the sentencing. In this case, there was a surprise defense witness that was not allowed to testify in the first trial, Marguerite Jackson, and she said that the accuser, Andrea Constant, had said to her, quote, it would be easy, had asked her it would be easy to fabricate an accusation of sexual assault against a celebrity to make money. That Andrea Constant felt that would be an easy thing to do, and obviously the motivation would be money if you believe this testimony from this witness. Didn't seem to make a difference.
It didn't seem to. Look, I mean, jurors can take this and they can play it how they want. They can assign a lot of value to one piece of testimony. They can assign very little to another piece. Apparently, even though that evidence came into this case, the jurors must have looked at it and said, you know what, we don't assign this a very high probative value.
But they did ask for it to be reread. They had a couple of questions while they were deliberating. One of them was, can we reread this testimony from the defense witness? The other one was, can we reread Cosby's deposition from the civil trial where he admitted to giving women quaaludes in the past, but where he also said that the sex with Andrea Constant was consensual. He did say that in the civil deposition. So the incriminating part that was hammered home by the prosecution was really that he had admitted to drugging other women in the past. So they reread that deposition testimony alongside this new defense witness's testimony, who said that the accuser's motive was fame and money.
Look, trials don't go to trial. Cases don't go to trial if they are clear-cut usually. Okay, now we're in one in the Sean Gray case in Ohio that seems pretty clear-cut. But look, juries have to make tough decisions with oftentimes competing pieces of evidence. Here, they turned around and said, even though she made that comment, What was the context? They may have looked at that comment in a greater context and determined that on the scale from, 0 to 100, that piece of evidence only got a 20, but that her testimony on the stand about how this presumably went out, when coupled with the memories of the other women who testified, they assigned that a greater evidentiary weight. And that's what juries are here for. They are here to settle factual disputes. Here's one fact, here's another fact, they collide. That's what juries are here to do.
Yeah, and so they had deliberated for a long time. Do you think that this was a difficult decision for them to come to, the fact that they deliberated in excess of 14 hours? Is that a long time comparatively to some of the trials that you've seen?
It's
on a case like
it's
this?
About average, I would say. I mean, look, I don't think any jury that takes its duty seriously has an easy time deliberating. We had that horrendous case in Florida where the man was accused of basically taking and raping and killing the little girl, Cherish Periwinkle.
Yes.
They were in and out the door in, 15 minutes, 18 minutes, something like that. They went through a quick deliberation, but I don't think that they did it lightheartedly. I think that most jurors, 99.999% of jurors, take their sworn oaths very seriously. They know that there are serious issues on the table. I think this Cosby jury, look, they had 3 charges. Ultimately, it was just 3 counts of the same flavor, okay? So 3 aggravated assaults. They went through it. They mulled it over. They went home. They slept on it. They came back together today. They talked it over a little bit more, and they were satisfied with their decision. I think they probably took it seriously. Most juries do.
And lastly, obviously, a very high-profile trial, the second one. They were sequestered since the start of the trial, but obviously, come on, they had access to know what was going on in this case in the first trial. So how much do you think that prejudiced them? Just the high-profile paparazzi media coverage nature of this Bill Cosby trial and who he is.
I'd have to go back and look at the voir dire, because oftentimes in that process of questioning the pool of jurors before the case, they try to ferret out or weed out anybody.
Of course, but who didn't know about this and who doesn't know who Bill Cosby is,
it's a question of the degree, okay? So, yeah, I know who he is. I heard that he was accused, but I don't know that much more about it. I didn't follow it that closely. I work full time. I have young kids. I don't have the time to pay attention to it. I knew a little something about it. Jurors like that usually get onto panels. Somebody who's active with a career, probably educated, they'll look at that juror and say, even though that juror knows a little something about it, they are educated, open to examining things deeply, and not trusting to the base knowledge that they know. Well, yeah, I heard that he was accused. That doesn't necessarily tell me he's guilty. I'm willing to judge your case fairly based on what you put in front of me when I am sitting in that chair. So even though they knew something, assuming that they did, it might not necessarily disqualify them.
And just to reiterate, that was Bill Cosby has been found guilty on 3 counts of indecent assault. We'll be back right after this quick commercial break. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host, Amy Dash, here with my fellow host, Aaron Keller. We have big news that Bill Cosby has been found guilty on 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault in connection with accusations that he raped a former operations manager from Temple University basketball team, Andre Constant, and the 80-year-old now faces up to 30 years in prison. Some new developments during the break. Bill Cosby has been let out on bail, right, Aaron? And he had to surrender his passport, but not without some courtroom drama. Tell us what happened.
Well, our understanding from what we're hearing from the courtroom is that he lashed out at prosecutors in what's being described as an expletive-laden tirade. So this guy flips out in the courtroom at the prosecution team that just put him away.
And we saw that tension rising during closing arguments when the prosecutor called him, formerly America's dad, now a con artist, and he was accused of laughing at his victims during the closing arguments, really portrayed in a way where he used his comedic success, he used this traditional family image of him being America's dad to gain the trust of these women, only to drug and rape them. That was what the prosecutor ended the case with. That's what was stuck in the jurors' minds. Now you see that he's been found guilty, he's been released, and they wanted his passport, and he said something about, I don't have an effing plane, when the judge said you have to hand over your passport.
Yeah, I mean, what's he trying to say? That he's at no risk of leaving the state? He was ordered to remain in the state. He was ordered to hand over his passport so that he, to presumably keep him around until he's actually sentenced. So, look, as one person is now saying on Twitter, well, that ought to go over well in front of the judge. When you flip out on the prosecutor, we don't know exactly where it was. Was it in the hallway? Was it in the courtroom? Is it on the record?
I don't think it's common sense that Bill Cosby doesn't have a plane. I mean, obviously, he has a lot of money. He could have access to all types of transportation.
Well, yeah, I mean, but
not to say he's a flight risk.
I want to know what the context of this is. But the bottom line is that apparently the guy flipped out. Bill Cosby flipped out after he learned his verdict in what's being described by the Associated Press as a tirade in the courtroom. After his conviction, a tirade.
Right.
Okay, this doesn't sound like just dropping an F-bomb, which is what one version of this is. This sounds like, I mean, something that's more prolonged.
You know what, though, Aaron, just to speak frankly here, I'm surprised we don't see that more often. I think that's understandable when you're convicted of a crime, especially if you think you're innocent, whether or not he does. I mean, if you're somebody who knows that you're guilty and acknowledges your guilt, maybe you're okay with a guilty verdict. But how come it's more shocking when somebody's outraged that they've been convicted and they could potentially go to jail for the rest of their lives than when they're not? I find it more shocking that somebody can sit there, like we saw with Tex McIver or some of these other people, expressionless when they've been found guilty.
Most attorneys warn their clients that, okay, we're going to hit this point where it's going to be one decision or it's going to be the other, and they warn their clients, you need to be prepared for both. You need to remain composed. You need to not get yourself into any further trouble if you don't like the verdict as it's read. You need to listen to the judge. You need to behave yourself. And I think most clients take that advice very seriously.
But that's his life, Aaron. That's his life.
I get that, but
and
look,
he's 80
I mean, by doing something worse, okay, by misbehaving, any defendant runs the risk of just making it worse for themselves. So, okay, well, even if we beat your whatever conviction in some kind of an appeal, you can still get nailed for contempt or something else if you flip out or if there is a disturbance. Most attorneys also warn all of the families in the courtroom to prepare themselves for something that they might not like. And, whether it's a defendant's family, whether it's a victim's family, whether it is a victim that's sitting in the gallery during a criminal case, these people are all prepped and warned, and then the judge gives the admonishment, this is a court of law, I will not tolerate any outbursts, and that's the way this usually goes down.
It just seems easier said than done. Do you think that Bill Cosby was totally floored by this? Do you think the fact that he's a powerful celebrity, even to this day, despite all of the aggravation that he's been through, all of the negative publicity that he's been through, he's spent a life that's been filled with power, money, and respect? Do you think he thought there was no way that he would be found guilty today? I mean, especially considering the result we saw in the first trial.
Well, I mean, you ultimately seem to be asking me whether or not Bill Cosby's a spoiled brat. I don't know him personally, but is it possible that a celebrity who was extremely famous and arguably still is might behave or think in such a way? Of course it's possible, but I don't know him personally.
And do you think that maybe he thought he could get away with what was going on because of his celebrity and his power?
Yeah, I mean, assuming that the verdict is true, as of course we assume that it is, the evidence seems to stack up when you have 60 accusations, when you have a number of women taking the witness stand, taking an oath that this is the way it went down. Look, I mean, when did this happen and how long did it take for a conviction?
Yeah.
Presumably, one could argue that he got away with it for that many years.
Yeah. And also, we saw with the statute of limitations that a lot of these claims were precluded. Do you think, just to go back to the details of this case, because we wouldn't be seeing a case right now if they hadn't opened up that civil deposition, which of course a former prosecutor said they never would, and that's why he agreed. Is that an appealable ground, even though it's been led into both trials?
Well, look, there's always appealable grounds. I mean, somebody's going to look at it and they're going to say, okay, what are the easiest to attack legal decisions here? That's one. Allowing the multiple other victims who weren't part of the complaint or indictment to testify to sort of build up okay, to bolster one another, to use your
when they
word.
weren't allowed to testify in the first
When they
trial.
weren't
Only
allowed
one was
in the
allowed.
first
This time you
case.
had 5.
And look, I mean, does that mean that it's a slightly more sticky or a drastically more sticky evidence decision? Yes. But look, trial judges have to make a lot of evidence decisions on the fly, and a lot of these rules can be interpreted a couple of different ways. And here, what you had was a different interpretation, or perhaps a different argument from the prosecution as to how to get that evidence in. Maybe the first time around they didn't pay as much attention to it. My guess is that the first time around they didn't fight it as hard because they thought that they would have enough to get it without bringing the additional women in to get them to testify. They didn't want to push it that hard because they didn't want to create an issue that could be an appealable issue. A lot of times prosecutors don't throw everything into a case because they want to drain the water out of a potential appeal before it even gets that far. Why, as a prosecutor, risk your case? Yeah, you can have a stronger case if you throw more into it, but if it's a sticky piece of evidence that might result in appeal, you just don't bring it in because you don't want to lose your case on appeal eventually.
Yeah, they may not have pushed that hard, and I believe also the first time around the judge denied more than one person coming in. Now we saw 5 people testifying. We're getting a little more detail on that outburst in court from our producer Kathy Russin, from Carl Hessler Jr., who's a reporter down at the courthouse, saying that when the district attorney Kevin Steele asked for Bill Cosby's bail to be revoked, and he said Cosby has an airplane to flee. So he sort of made that factual determination, and then Cosby snapped back and shouted, "He doesn't have a plane, you asshole." Am I allowed to say that on the air? Asshole.
You just did. I wouldn't say it. But look, I mean, so we have... We have a
Wait, I just got in my ear. I was just told I'm allowed to say it, Aaron.
Well, we're not governed by the FCC here, but I always...
So let's stay true to the facts then.
The expletive deleted word apparently was uttered as part of a dispute between Cosby and the prosecutor as to whether or not he has a plane.
Right.
Well, okay, I mean, does he have a plane? Does his company have a plane? Does he have access to a plane? Whatever. I mean, the bottom line is these two don't like one another.
Right, but this doesn't seem that bad to me. I mean, if the some would say if the prosecutor can call him a con man and call him a rapist and call him a liar in the closing arguments, why can't he say, "I don't have a plane, you asshole"? It doesn't sound that bad to me. Does it sound bad to you? I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying, that there are rules that govern court
decorum.
Exactly, and they want to keep a certain level of respect for the judge and the legal system and the process. But here you have the DA making a factual assertion after this guy was convicted and found guilty on 3 counts of assault and could spend the rest of his life in prison. This does not seem that crazy to me. But I see you perceive it differently.
Well, look, I mean,
and you think it could hurt him actually down the road. That's what you're saying.
Well, look, I mean, at a minimum, it hurts him in the court of public opinion. I mean, here's a guy who a lot of people perceived as somehow being typical of the character he played as America's dad. You know, a successful guy, a doctor who had this family, and William Cosby, EDD. You know, he's educated in real life, and he carried that persona, and a lot of people have struggled to separate that with the allegations and now the conviction that have been made in this case. So then he flips out. Okay, does it make him look like more of the sort of guy that can kind of like fly off his handle, that he's not a gentleman? Look, we know some of what was said. I want to know the context, I want to know the tone, and I want to know the demeanor.
We're hearing that
we don't have all of that.
NBC 10 Philadelphia is reporting that Cosby accuser Lily Bernard says she is over-elated after the Cosby verdict. She said she didn't expect this outcome. Do you think a lot of the accusers are maybe shocked by this outcome and expected him to get off because of his celebrity or because of the outcome in the first trial? Why was there doubt here from some people?
I think a lot of, look, because you had contested evidence. You had this piece of information about the primary accuser in this case, Ms. Constadt, saying that it would be easy to basically get money out of a celebrity. Okay.
And a woman testified that she heard her say that.
Yes.
So this was the surprise witness from the defense.
And I think, look, I mean, we know from case after case after case that a lot of women who come forward with these accusations, and men in the clergy abuse scandal, are afraid that they will not be believed because it's one person's word against another, especially when it's this far removed from the date of the alleged offense.
And to your point, Fox News is reporting that Gloria Allred, obviously the very famous civil rights attorney, said just now, quote, "After all is said and done, women were finally believed." Exactly what you just said.
Yes, and we hear that in so many cases. I mean, look, I covered a not dissimilar local case where there were accusations against a coach earlier in my journalism career. The fear that the accusers had is that nobody would believe them. Now, interestingly, they were able to get some evidence recorded, and that's what made them ultimately believed, and it led to close to a $20 million judgment.
Yeah.
And
in this case, it really, I believe it was that deposition. If the deposition had not been unsealed from the civil case, where he admitted to giving Quaaludes to women in the past, and to your point, if there had not been 5 other women able to testify and give some graphic testimony about how he had assaulted them or attempted to assault them, we may not be seeing this result right now. We're going to go to a quick commercial break, and we'll be back right after this.